It's well reported that negative attitudes towards aging cause people to react more negatively towards daily stresses. In contrast, having positive views towards aging is associated with higher levels of life satisfaction, better self-related health, improved social networks, and better well-being. But how much control do we really have over our mindset when obstacles appear to be challenging us? Today's guest, motivational speaker Terry Tucker, says that the one thing he learnt during all his pain and suffering was that you have two choices. You can succumb to discomfort and misery, or you can learn to embrace it and use it to make you a stronger, better human being. When his own life changed after a cancer diagnosis led to his foot being amputated and later his leg, he came to understand that the responsibility for altering your life is entirely up to you. Hello and welcome to Ironing Out the Wrinkles. I'm your host, Ros McMaster.
And I'm your host, Kate Shaw. Together, we're taking the age out of ageism, helping men and women embrace life after 50 with less fear. So, are you stuck in a cycle of fear and negativity about all the changes that come with getting older? Fear of losing your identity after retirement and becoming invisible and invalid? Fear of the body changes and health issues? Fear of death and a sense of timing running out? And so on and so on. If so, stick around because Terry Tucker is going to help you move from discomfort to resilience using a system he developed called the 4 Truths. Terry Tucker is a motivational speaker, author, and international podcast guest on the topics of mindset, motivation, and self-development. He is the author of the book Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. He was a marketing executive, a hospital administrator, a SWAT team hostage negotiator, and a high school basketball coach, and most recently, a cancer warrior.
Terry Tucker, a warm welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Well, Roz and Kate, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Yeah, a lighthearted, funny story. I was actually listening to an interview that you were doing on another podcast, and they asked you what was the most challenging career job that you've had, because it's such an enormous resume that you've got there. And you said that you found coaching the girls' basketball team more difficult than being in the police force.
I really did. And it's funny because I have 2 brothers. I have no sisters. I went to an all-boys Catholic high school. I went to an all-male military college. And I remember when my wife and I have 1 daughter, and I remember when we went to the OBGYN, for a checkup, and she said, "Do you want to know what it is?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure." It's like, "Well, you should buy pink." I was like, "Oh, no. You need to keep it in there till it's done because I have no idea what to do with raising a girl." But yes, coaching girls it tried my patience. I loved them to death. They were great young women, but it was just entirely foreign for me. And I think I grew a lot. I hope they got something out of it as well.
Yeah, and I think dealing with parents is part of the challenge too. Let that be a lesson to all the parents out there. Let the coach do his job.
Yeah, exactly. I used to always tell the parents at our parents' meeting, "Look, if you don't tell me how to coach, I won't come to your job and tell you how to do your job. So just let me do it. I'll do the best I can. I will make mistakes, but I have your daughter's best interest in mind through this whole thing."
Yeah, that's fabulous.
Yeah.
But I think we'll jump into the 4 truths, and these were developed as part of your cancer journey. And I know that you say everyone needs to find out what their own truths are in life, but the truths that you discovered, I think, are pretty much the truths for everybody. And there's certainly the same truths that we need to help us navigate the challenges that come with getting older and all the changes that happen and the challenges we face. So your 4 truths fit into that, and you can't really separate them. I think they're like a web, aren't they? They're all kind of interconnected. And understanding death or embracing the inevitable, which is our passing, because we're all going to die sometime, is part of that that four truths. So let's start with what led to that, which was your cancer journey. If you want to tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So 2012, I was, as you just said, a girls' high school basketball coach in Texas here in the United States. And I had a callus break open on the bottom of my foot. And initially, I didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment and went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood. Nothing gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I received a call from him. And as I mentioned, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming. Until finally, he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen this form of cancer. You have a very rare form of melanoma. And most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun. It impacts the melanin, the pigment in our skin. This is a rare form that has nothing to do with sun exposure, that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And because my cancer was so incredibly rare, he recommended a world-renowned cancer hospital that I should go to. So I did, and they cut out the bottom of my foot. They took all the lymph nodes in my groin out. And at the time, melanoma was pretty much a death sentence. There was no treatment for it. There were no drugs they could give me. So when I healed, my doctor put me on a weekly injection of a drug called interferon to kind of help keep the disease from coming back. And the side effects of the interferon were that it gave me severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. And as I said, that wasn't a cure. That was, as my doctor used to say, we're trying to kick the can down the road and buy you more
Yes.
time.
Yes.
So 5 years of interferon eventually became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a fever of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive. Somehow I survived that, had to stop the interferon, and almost immediately the cancer came back in the exact same spot on my foot where it had presented 5 years earlier. That necessitated the amputation of my left foot in 2018. Cancer worked its way up my leg, 2019, 2 more surgeries. And then right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, an undiagnosed tumor kind of in my ankle area grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone. And my only recourse was to have my left leg amputated above the knee. And I also found out I had tumors in my lungs, which I am still being treated for those tumors.
Yes, I was just
And
listening
on
to
that
a
uplifting
podcast this
note-
morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's devastating, but ever onwards, it's what you're doing, which is amazing.
Yeah, you've got such a positive attitude. And I was listening to just another podcast this morning of yours and heard you say that they're in your lungs now. So
I'm so sorry. It's
really
awful.
sorry to hear about that. But you're quite okay with it. You've embraced death, and because your whole thing is about the mark that you're leaving behind, and you're ticking all the boxes. So the four truths came about from the journey that you were taking with cancer. Yeah. So
They did.
and there's 3 F's in there somewhere too, before we get to the four truths. Where did the 3, that was part of the cancer journey too, wasn't it?
Sure, it was. I mean, the 3 F's are what I call they're faith, family, and friends. I have a very deep faith in God. It's funny. I don't know how it is in Australia, but certainly here in the United States, I've seen so many people, they start down a road toward a goal and then they butt up against an impediment. Something gets in their way and they can't get over it, around it, through it, whatever. And so they quit. But we're great here in the United States, especially. We don't just quit. We got to blame somebody. You know, we got
It's
to blame
human
our mom and
nature.
dad.
I think we
gotta
all
blame
do.
our boss or our station in life.
Mhm.
And when I found out people found out I had cancer, they're like, well, who do you blame? Like, what do you mean? Who do I blame? So, well, you got to blame somebody. I'm like, no, I don't blame anybody. But then they find out I have a faith life, and they're like, well, you must blame God. I used to joke with them. I'm like, no, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning, checked his to-do list, and said, Terry Tucker cancer today. You know, I don't believe that at all. But I do believe God has given me the strength to get through these 10 years. So that's the faith part of it. The family part, it's my wife and daughter. And I remember when I had my leg amputated, my doctor wanted to put me on chemotherapy. And I looked at him and I said, is it going to save my life? He said, no, but it might buy you some more time. And I was 8 years into this journey. And I said, well, if the outcome's going to be the same, I really don't know if I want to take chemo, and be sick and go through all that and still die. I said, but I'll go home and talk to my family. So I go home and I start telling my family, and my daughter, she's hilarious. She's like, and it really did happen this way. She said, all right, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's 3 of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that, So we end up sitting around the kitchen table and individually talking about how we feel about me having chemotherapy. And when we're done with that, my daughter's like, all right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raised their hand. I'm like, wait a minute. Am I getting outvoted for something that I don't want to do? But I remembered back when I was in the police academy, and our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we love the most to class. And as we were learning techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemotherapy, not because I wanted to, but because I love my wife and daughter more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was a bridge to get me to where I am now. So that's the family part. And then the friends part, I think you really find out who's in your corner when you have a chronic or a terminal illness. People you expected to be there all of a sudden aren't. And people who you never expected to be there all of a sudden never leave your side. And it's really a tremendous feeling.
You can relate to that. We both had cancer.
Yeah. And I think, when I was sort of reading your 3 Fs, I thought, well, there's a 4th F that I would actually add to that from my own cancer journey, and that's forgiveness. Because, I did a Buddhist course on death and dying around about 2010, I think it was, and they said to be at peace at the time of your passing, you need to be at peace spiritually, physically, and emotionally. And hearing that at that time sent me on this tremendous journey to healing relationships, living with gratitude. So by the time I was diagnosed with cancer in 2016, I'd already started that journey of the 3 Fs, and I felt very much at peace. But I had a very toxic marriage. And so for me to really be at peace, I had to find forgiveness. And that was another F that, I added to that little bow. But interesting too, just where you talk about having the photograph to remember what's important. My stepmother was telling me, she's German, and she was talking about when her father was in the war. And she said he was walking through the forest and he ran across a Russian soldier, and they both got such a fright. They each pulled out a photo of their family and ran in the other direction from each other. So it's like, hey, I'm a family member.
Yeah.
I've got people who love me back at home. Yeah, so important.
Yeah.
It is. It really is. I mean, it's so much not about you, when you're going through this. It's the impact that it has on, all the other people that you touch, whether it's your friends, your family, your spouse, your children, whatever. And I think that's something I've really been cognizant of. The fact that this, yes, I'm going through the physical pain, but they're going through the emotional pain. And I think in a lot of cases, the emotional pain sometimes hurts a little bit more than the physical pain.
Oh, absolutely. Like you're comfortable with dying. It's like you're excited about, wow, what's on the other side? I think that's going to be pretty good over there. But they're the ones going to be left behind with the grief and the hole in the heart. So much, much worse for the people being left behind.
Yes.
Yeah. But another reason not to blame God is that you think part of the journey is about helping others through your
I
own
mean, it
story.
is. Yeah, I mean, we're all gonna. I mean, that's the great thing about death. We all get it once.
Yeah.
I mean, so it is, and it's not the dying. And I think you both have figured this out. A lot of people haven't. It's the living.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to die, but not everybody's really going to live.
But I
And
love
I
what
think
you
it's
said there. So you
Yeah.
said that it's not what you do, it's not what you do that matters, it's how you make people feel. And you've covered that a lot in your work.
it's true. And when I was diagnosed, I made a conscious decision that I would never, I don't care how bad of a day I was having, I don't care how much I was hurting, whatever. I was never going to take out my misfortune on a doctor, on a nurse, on a therapist, on somebody that was going to help me. And I've seen so many people do that. They lash out, and I know why they do. They're scared, they're anxious, they're worried. I get it. But why are you lashing out at somebody who's trying to help you, trying to, ease your pain, whether it's mental or emotional or physical? Why are you doing that? I know why they're doing it. It just, so far, I've kept my promise to myself that I would never lash out at anybody. And there have been times when I felt that I didn't treat that nurse. I had a nurse a couple cycles ago that tried to start an IV on me. And I was not in a good mood. She was going in a place where I knew she wasn't going to get it. And I was telling her, you're not going to get it there. You're not going to get it there. And I was being very negative. I wasn't being mean, but I was being very negative. And she tried it twice, couldn't get it, and walked away. And I didn't see her again for the rest of my treatment. So the last time I went back, I found her and I said, look, last time you tried to do this, I was a jerk. And I'm sorry I was a jerk. You didn't deserve that. I was just telling you what I knew, and I know you were trying to do the best you can. So, I'm not perfect. I'm a human being. I make mistakes, but
Yeah.
hopefully I apologize when I do.
Words are powerful, aren't they?
They
Yeah.
are.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. But I mean, that's, one of the things with mindset and, for people moving into the second half of their life with all the challenges they're facing and, they don't know how to move beyond their fear of the change. Your whole attitude is about knowing what you have control over and what you don't, and the mindset around that.
It really is. When I was at college, I went to a military college, as I mentioned, and we had a president one year who was a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War back in the 60s and the 70s, and he was a prisoner for 8 years. He was confined to the Hanoi Hilton. He was beaten. He was tortured. He won our highest military award, the Medal of Honor. And I remember being at an event with him, and somebody asked him, who survived that horrible captivity? And he said, it wasn't the big, tall, strong, tough guys that, said, hey, I can handle whatever torture or whatever you do, because people can come up with horrible ways to torture each other. He said, those were not the people that survived. He said, it really wasn't even the optimists, the people who said, hey, we're going to be released by Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter, because Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter came and they weren't released. And those people, he said, died of a broken heart. He said the people that survived understood what they could control and controlled it. And he said for us, it was basically our breathing and our thoughts. Those were the only two things that when we were in captivity that we had control over. And the people that figured that out survived that horrible disaster, for lack of a better word. And the people who didn't survive it.
Wow, I love that story. And sometimes it is just that simple, isn't it? You only have control over your breath. Yeah, it's just it's just that simple. People, Kate was going to ask the question today. Well, it's fair enough to say control your mind so it doesn't control you, but what's the step to that? People think there's some sort of big journey you need to go on or steps that you need to take, but it's that simple. Control your breath.
How do people? Yeah, well, I think we can all do that, because there will be people listening, hopefully, who are well over 50, and they've never heard of this, controlling your mind. Where do they start? So we can all concentrate on the breath. That's a really good. I could do that too. It's simple.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody is confining you and you're in shackles and things like that, and there really isn't a lot. They determine when you eat. They determine when you go to the bathroom. They determine everything in your life. So you can imagine, what did you have control over? What was going on in my mind and my breathing? Now, you and I and everybody listening to us probably is not in captivity. So maybe we have more control over some, our attitudes and things like that. But for the most part, I used to constantly remind my basketball players that they needed to become comfortable with being uncomfortable, because being uncomfortable is another way of realizing that there's so much more that you can do. And everything starts with your mind. I mean, if you can't control your mind, everything else goes out the window. But if you can control it, there's really nothing that's going to come to you that you're not going to be able, or you shouldn't be able to handle, including, chronic or terminal illness and even death.
Yeah. And it's funny you say we're not in captivity, but if we're letting our minds control us, we are in captivity, aren't we?
That's a good point. That's a
the
great
time.
Point.
All the time.
But I love that story that you recounted on a previous podcast that I've been listening to dozens. You were talking about research that was done on a basketball team again, and how the coach took half the team and had them practice shooting hoops, the goals, and the other half had to close their eyes and imagine that they're doing that. And research showed down the track that the people that had actually closed their eyes and imagined themselves shooting hoops actually exceeded the ones that did. They were actually better. So I thought, is that saying our mind is just so powerful, we can probably do a lot more than we realize?
I think that's part of it. But if you think about it, I mean, if I asked you to do something, you would do it over and over and over in your mind. Kind of like if I was going to practice shooting free throws in my mind, I never missed in my mind. At least I hope I didn't. I see myself being successful every single time. And they've also done research in terms of MRI scans and stuff of the brain, where you take a basketball, you go out, you get on the free throw line, and you practice shooting free throws. Well, there's a certain part of your brain that lights up as you're making those connections, where you're continuing to do that. Well, when you think about taking that basketball, going out on the court and practicing those free throws, that exact same part of your brain lights up. And which tells me, and what I always tell people, we all talk to ourselves, whether we like to admit it or not. We all have that self-talk. But what it tells me is, be very careful with that self-talk, because we all become what we think.
Wow.
Yeah. And that sort of speaks too of changing the language around something, doesn't it? In order to see it in a more positive light. I think you used the expression like, I have to go versus I get to go.
And short.
Yeah.
And how many people do that? You get up in the morning, I have to go to work, or I have to take the kids to school, or whatever it is. What if you change that to I get to? Because there are certain people that would love to go to work, that would love to get up and go to work. And I had a nurse. Almost all of my stories are nurse or basketball wise, so you guys are gonna have to hang with me on that. So I had a nurse who asked me, what it was like to have my, sorry, that's a different story. No, it is, seriously. And so when I first met this nurse, she was already a nurse, but she was in training on the unit where I get treated for my lung tumors. And she's about 25 years old. And about 6 months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And she came in and she said, Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I'm a little uncomfortable telling you this story. And I really didn't know how to respond to that. What do you say to somebody when they tell you that? I said, well, gee, it sounds like it might be interesting. I hope you decide you want to tell me. And so she's in and out doing her thing and giving me the medicine and all that stuff. And about 2 hours later, she comes in, sits down in the bed. She's like, all right, here's the story. When I first met you, I was going to get out of nursing. I had had a good friend of mine die. I was in a really dark place. I talked to my parents and I was going to go to work for Amazon. And then I met you. And I see what you go through, what your treatments are like, how ugly they are, how much you hurt. And then I went back and read your story and all the things you've had done. And she said, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. And now, if she would have never told me that story, I would have had no idea that my mind, or that my story had such a positive impact on her. And I always tell people, I don't care how bad your story is, I don't care how much pain and ugliness you're going through. I guarantee you there are people out there that are watching you and seeing how you live your life. And some of them would give almost everything they have just to walk in your shoes for 5 minutes.
Yeah, we forget that, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, your whole premise, I think we said earlier, was about what mark are you leaving on the world? And, I get people who are afraid to retire and, what am I going to do now? Just go out and be the best grandma, go out and smile at the people at the checkout. It doesn't have to be something major. Just be conscious of what mark you're leaving on the world. And I think I said to you earlier, I live like I'm dying, because that makes me conscious of how I'm living now and what I'm putting into life now. And so many people are afraid to talk about dying. When I did that Buddhist course several years ago, we had to go out and talk to people about death, and, doors were closing in my face. People are afraid to talk about death. But I live like I'm dying, and that makes every day just precious and amazing, and makes me conscious of what mark I'm leaving on the world.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, my neighbor across the street, if we start talking about, the fact I planned my funeral and things, he nope, can't deal with that. And he will extricate himself from the conversation because he can't deal with it. And he's in his 50s, but he's got a young son and things like that. And I get it. Some people can't face death. And I mean, I don't know whether it's all the people that I've seen die, either in my family or unfortunately when I was a police officer and things like that. I'm not saying you ever get comfortable with it, but you realize it's inevitable. So why worry about it? Why not, as you say, concentrate on living your life? And when I was a police officer, I saw not so many, but I saw enough people that, had been on the job for 35, 40 years and couldn't retire because their identity was tied to that gun and that badge and their authority and things like that. Yeah. And they couldn't give that up because somehow they thought they weren't productive. They weren't, their life didn't have any meaning anymore. And it's like, oh my God, you gave 40 years to your community of protecting it and serving it. You have every right to sit in your rocking chair or read your paper, do whatever the heck you want to do. You've earned that right. But that's not the way they saw it. They couldn't give up. They couldn't get away from that because that's who they were.
And they don't feel enough, do they?
Yeah, attachment to your identity from the past. And that's one of the stresses, isn't it? Not being able to let go of the attachment to that identity. And because you've had so many jobs, what was the process of just moving from one to the other? Was it that easy? Or did you have a period of having to let go and readjust and think about who am I now? What am I going to do now in between all those jobs?
Yeah, I do. When people, sort of quote my resume, I think, geez, one of these days I got to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up, kind of thing, But my first two jobs were in business. And if there's a backstory to that. My grandfather was a Chicago police officer. Chicago is one of the largest cities here in the United States from 1924 to 1954. And he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories that my grandmother used to tell of that knock on the door of, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. And my grandfather was shot in 1933, so a long, long time ago. But when I expressed an interest in going into law enforcement, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to go to college, you're going to major in business, get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after.
Yeah, sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's what my dad wanted me to do. That's not what I felt my passion was. So when I graduated from college, I had a choice. My father was dying of cancer, I could have said, you know what, I know you're dying, Dad, but sorry, I'm going to go blaze my own trail. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So I did. My first 2 jobs were in business out of love and respect for my father. And I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited till my father passed away, and then I followed my own dreams. So, I'm sure there's people out there, maybe not so much people in their 50s, but that there was a significant person in their life, a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, somebody who was pushing them to do something that they didn't want to do. And I guess maybe people in their 50s now could be in that situation where they're doing that. They want their children or whoever, their grandchildren, to say, hey, I want you to do this. And the grandchild or the child is saying, that's not what I feel is in my heart. And I always felt being a police officer was what I was supposed to do. I was, it was about making a difference. And I felt that was my way of doing it. So, it's not easy, but you really kind of sometimes have to say to people you love, I know you have my best interest in mind, but I have to live my own life, and you have to be happy with the choices that I make.
Yeah, and it comes back to, that's the thing, isn't it? Choice, knowing you have a choice. And even when you decided not to follow your own dreams because of respect for your father, you didn't blame him. You understood that you made the choice consciously. And that's the thing, blame, instead of blaming, realize the choices that you made, because you do have a hand, you do play a role in every decision you make, or every sort of happiness or grief. But Kate's father, we interviewed him too. He's 93, and he was saying the same thing about, that we shouldn't be influencing our children's decisions and directions that they make. Ultimately, it's their life, but I think he was saying he'd made a few mistakes in that area.
I wanted to be a flight attendant. No, you're not.
Yeah.
But he's mellowed a lot. Age does, in hindsight, when you look back on your life, he's a totally different man now. He's very wise.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask you, if you don't mind, Terry, you also suggest there's 3 basic ways to help us all live our best life, being excellence, achievement, and sustaining something. But when we're getting into the second stage of life, 50, 60, even 70, or even 80, how can we, or even 90, how can we actually step into this new path in this second part of our life? How can we, is it too late to start doing it?
I don't think it is. I mean, if you look at people, throughout history, Vincent van Gogh, is one of the greatest painters of all times, but most people would say in his lifetime, he was a failure. He sold 1 painting while he was alive. It wasn't until after his death that he actually became a famous painter. I don't know if you have Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in Australia,
yes.
But Colonel Sanders, Colonel Sanders, who started Kentucky Fried Chicken, didn't start that franchise until he was after he retired, till he was in his 60s. So I mean, history is full of people who just didn't quit, who didn't give up, and said, okay, I'm going to keep trying to find my purpose or what it is. And I think the other thing I'll say about purpose is purpose changes over, at least I think it changes. It certainly has changed for me over my life. When I was young, it was sports. I would sleep with a basketball. I loved the game. It's what I did. And I ended up going to college on a scholarship because of it. And then, as I got into my adult life, it was more, I was in business, and then I went into law enforcement. And now, as I'm probably coming to the end of my life, my goal, my purpose is to put as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love back into the world as I possibly can. And, a lot of people think that, well, my purpose or my passion has to be my job or my occupation. And if that works out, that's great. I think it's super if that works out, but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, your job could be something over here you do to pay the bills, but your purpose is over here, and it's to, be a podcast host, or to paint, or to write, or to, take care of your grandkids while your kids go to work, whatever it is that you find that you feel you're supposed to do. And I always say that we all have unique gifts and talents, and again, being someone who believes in God, I am so overwhelmed sometimes to think that in the history of the world, in the history of man, there has never been anybody like me. There will never be anybody like me after that. I am that unique. My abilities, my gifts, my talents are that unique. And shouldn't I use them for the betterment of other people? And I'll end with this. We spend a lot of time in our lives. We graduate from high school or college or what, military, whatever we end up doing. And then we get into life. We start doing things. And there seems to be this idea that we are born empty and we need to spend our lives consuming, I got to get a good job. I got to make money. I've got to, have a nice car, live. We consume and consume to fill ourselves up. And what I'm starting to believe is that it's just the opposite, that we're born full and our job, our purpose is to basically pour ourselves out for the betterment of ourselves, our family, our friends, our communities, our world. And it's just a different way of looking at things because, we're bombarded with, you got to have all this stuff. And if you have all this stuff, it makes you happy. And I think just the opposite. I think you're born full and you'll be happier if you just pour yourself out and help other people.
Terry Tucker, thank you so much. And what a lovely way to close. That was beautiful.
So inspiring. Thank you.
Yeah. And we wish you truly all the best with your journey ahead. And thank you for the mark that you are leaving on the world.
Very profound, very special. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for having me on. I really enjoyed talking with you.